conference attendees to welcome the College of Fellows, members that have joined us, and for me to introduce Mr. Jeff Dell, who is a Dean of the College of Fellows of the Safety Institute of Australia.
Well, welcome folks on behalf of the Safety Institute of Australia and in particular the College of Fellows. We're particularly excited about the relationship that's growing between Army Safety and the Safety Institute. We thought it would be worthwhile for both the Army representatives here and also for the broader Fellows of the Safety Institute to come together to discuss some issues of mutual interest. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Don Eckenfelder.
I think this is the 7th time I've been to Australia, and only 5 times to New Zealand, so Australia is 2 up on New Zealand, which I'm sure will please people here. Yesterday was a meeting where someone was making a comment about the relationship between Kiwis and Aussies, and my wife and I continue each time we come here to be very amused by that relationship. Probably the first rule of public speaking is to make yourself credible, and I'm going to break that rule now by way of telling you a little bit about how I've gotten here. I have a degree in chemical engineering. I was a fire protection engineer, safety manager, corporate safety director for a Fortune 100 company, CSP, professional engineer, and so forth and so on. And about 10 years ago, I came to the realization that perhaps I hadn't been doing everything wrong for some 30 years, but I'd been doing most of it wrong, which was a very sobering moment. And when I had previously reflected on some of my accomplishments, needless to say, I felt pretty good about myself. When I came to that particular realization, I started to think that probably all those things were just good luck, because I had missed such a big point that was so terribly important. And then I reflected on how I had missed it, and I had missed it so profoundly and so obviously that it was flat out scary. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. How many of you have read Louis Gerstner's book, Who Says Elephants Can't Dance? Anybody? How many of you know who Louis Gerstner is, or what he is? It's not was. Okay. How many of you have ever heard of IBM? Okay. Louis Gerstner became chairman and CEO of IBM in 1993. How many of you know what was happening to IBM in 1993? They were in deep trouble. They were about 6 months from bankruptcy and dissolution. That never happened. IBM is alive and well. And Louis Gerstner wrote a book, Who Says Elephants Can't Dance. And one of the quotes on the back of that book was, when I started at IBM, I thought culture was important. When I finished at IBM, I realized that it was the only thing that was important. That's a pretty profound statement. Now, in the book, if you read the book, he doesn't codify or quantify what he'd done. And that's one of the problems with culture. It's talked about all the time, but if you can't quantify, codify, and use it to qualify other things, it's just talk. When you talk about loss prevention or business success, there are certain ingredients that are associated with that. And we have what we call a bridge metaphor, where we talk about what those things are. And they're things that you're all familiar with. They're leadership, they're systems, they're technology, they are programs, they are compliance, they are behaviors. And you have to get all those things right if you're going to be successful. But you need to have the right culture too. And I have a little diagram where I show arrows going from culture to all of those things in what we call a bridge metaphor. And the first time I think I showed that was at Unical, Thailand in Bangkok. Somebody raised their hand and said, hopefully was getting into some debate, similar to hopefully what we're going to have here, some discussion and some intellectual stimulation. The person said, can I say something? I said, sure. He said, I think the diagram's wrong. And I said, how is the diagram wrong? He said, the arrows go the other way. And what did I say to him? I said, you're right. That's the problem. Because basically what we do is we do systems, we do programs, we do compliance, we do technology, we do behaviors, and we get a culture, right? Now, culture is basically an organization's character. Is there anybody in the room who thinks they don't have a character? Is there anybody in the room who knows anybody who doesn't have a character? I always get a few hands on that one. Might I suggest that they actually have a character, you just don't like it, okay? And there's a story that I remembered as I was sitting in the back that I think is relevant to the discussion here as it relates to all of you, but most particularly to the military. And I've never been in the military myself. I took 2 years of compulsory ROTC in college and decided that I wasn't the military type and I probably wouldn't be successful at that. And in retrospect, I think I was probably right. But anyway, the story has to do with, we stopped to visit my daughter, Jill, who lives in the Central Valley of California. She has one of her sons, Gavin, was 5 years old, and he's standing on the staircase arguing with her. And she grew up kind of a tomboy, and she wins most of the arguments with the boys. They do not put much over on her. And she was bantering back and forth with him. And finally, he just got fed up. And he realized that, you know, it was going to be another loss for him. And he said, I'm out of here. He's 5 years old. So she's standing downstairs, and she's hearing doors slam and closets and things going on. And she might do something about that, but normally the house sounds like that kind of anyway, and she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of going up to check on what he's doing. And all of a sudden, he's standing on the staircase with a suitcase in his hands. And she looks at him and she says, where the heck do you think you're going? And he said, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not allowed to cross the street by myself. I packed your bag. What's the point of the story? It's silly because here there's a big rule: you can't leave home, 5-year-old, and he wants to leave. He's going to make something happen that separates him from her, but he's got this rule that he really believes in, that he can't cross the street by himself. I would submit that there are an awful lot of rules out there that work against us seriously considering the subject of culture. And an awful lot of people shy away from it because of those rules and thinking that, hey, I'm not a social scientist, I can't do this. I get news for you, we're all social scientists. And I now am describing myself, when people say, what do you do? I at times say, I'm an amateur applied social scientist trapped in the body of a safety engineer. Now, I have also periodically described myself as a quixotic iconoclast. So my evolution from a chemical engineer to a safety engineer to this amateur applied social scientist is not really strange, given my basic constitution. Let's get into some of the nuts and bolts. A couple of the words I heard and saw with regard to this process here earlier today were things like ownership and empowerment and so forth. One of the beauties of addressing the subject of culture directly is to almost automatically facilitate empowerment and empower people and get them to assume ownership. Because you start talking about things that almost everybody really understands. How many of you, when you go into a restaurant or a store, can probably tell me whether they're going to be successful or not? Well, the store's going to be there 5 years from now, or the restaurant's still going to be in business in 5 years. How many of you think you could do that? I think almost all of you could, to some degree or another. How do you know that? What is it that, what kicks in there that lets you know that that's, or makes you feel that way?
Attitude of the staff.
Exactly. One of the things, it's how they look at each other, isn't it, sometimes? How they talk to each other. How they look at you and how they talk to you. What the place looks like. The other kind of people who are there. All of that and more. But it's something that you feel. How many of you, all of you have somebody who you're very close to, whether that may be a spouse or a child or a parent or whatever. If I was to give you a for instance about that person, like they went into a store and gave somebody $20 and came out and ended up getting change for $50, what would they do? Or if their bank account had more money in than it should, how would they respond to that? Or if you're in a supermarket and somebody was beating their child, what would they do? You could probably tell me what the person would do, can't you? How do you know that? You know their values, exactly. Now, sometimes people say you've seen them in situations like that before, and of course that's partly true too. But mostly it's that you know what goes on inside them, right? You know what basically makes them tick. If you know what makes an organization tick, you can tell how that organization is going to perform. You can tell how they're going to respond to different kinds of situations. And basically modern management thinking is to have less inspection, not more. I know we were talking about inspection before, and you got to have inspection, you got to have technology, you got to have all that stuff. But you ought to be aiming for less inspection, not more, and getting people to do what you want them to do because they believe it, not because they're being watched. What happens if all of you, we went through the thing of 12-and-a-half-year-olds and how many had siblings and how many were so forth and so on. Everybody in the room has either had a child or been a child. That's an accurate statement, isn't it? Okay, so if as either the child or the parent, if there's a rule and the children don't accept the rule, don't accept it at all, what happens when the parents leave home and leave the kids there for the weekend? The rule gets broken, right? Sometimes if it's been watched over very carefully and it's been monitored very carefully, the rule doesn't just get broken, does it? It gets broken with what? Passion, okay? So the whole idea of making rules and inspecting, if the people who are being watched don't buy in, it's got some really serious problems associated with it. So the name of the game is, I think, modern management thinking. Deming, Drucker, other management gurus have said less inspection, not more, whether this relates to quality or safety or whatever. So while you have to have a certain amount of inspection, and maybe more rather than less in the beginning, the goal should be to have less inspection and get people to do things because they believe in doing the right thing, so that the changes are coming from the inside out instead of from the outside in. And what this is all about is creating the right culture in an organization. One of the diagrams that we use is what we call a performance map, where we suggest that what people or organizations believe and value will determine what the climate or atmosphere is in that organization. And that climate or atmosphere will predict what the behaviors are, and the behaviors will predict the performance. And the performance, if it's good, will reinforce the beliefs and values, and you get a feedback loop. And then the question is, what should you be dealing with? And mostly in human organizations, we deal with the behaviors. We deal with the behaviors. We say, we want you to behave this way, we're going to watch you, we're going to monitor you, and what have you. My thesis is you're a whole lot better operating and dealing upstream rather than downstream. If you've got a cottage or a house on a stream or a river that overflows periodically, would you think it would be a good idea to have a garage full of sandbags? Would it be a better idea to get somebody to build levees? Would it be even a better idea to find out what the 100-year flood level was and build your house up on stilts higher than that? Would it maybe be even a better idea to get somebody to build a dam upstream? That's basically the metaphor for what we suggest behaviorally, is that if you should deal with beliefs and values, and if you get those right, everything else gets a lot easier. Doesn't mean you can forget compliance. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have the best technology. Doesn't mean you shouldn't define the behaviors that you desire and that you don't desire. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't have programs. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't have systems. Doesn't mean that you need to continuously develop leadership. But it means that you need to attend to the subject of culture just as rigorously as you have to all those others. And what sent me into analyzing, studying, thinking about, and developing products and services related to this was a lot of people have done a lot of really good work on all those other things. And there's not a whole lot of good work that's been done on culture.